G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing a good friend of mine, Steve McCullagh from Healthy Business. He's based here in rainy Hobart in Australia with me. Thanks for your time today, Steve.
Mate, it's great to be on the podcast, Troy. Finally, yeah. Well, I was thinking about it the other day. Rambo hasn't even been on yet. Greg Ramsey, a good friend of ours. So you've beaten him onto the cast. Well, I'm proud of that actually. So I'd be worried if Rambo had have got on before me.
Yeah. We had a great night last night at the monthly meetup here in Hobart. Business owners, we had about over 40 business owners listening to the coach and the CEO of the Jack Jumpers, the Tasmanian NBL team, the second best basketball league in the world, they said last night, from a quality point of view, talking about culture, and it was terrific. Great night.
It was great. And look, that's how, I think that's probably going to be your first question, but that's how we sort of got to know each other. I'm fairly new in Tasmania and your meetups on Wednesday nights, particularly when I first arrived in Tasmania, were really valuable for me to get to know people and make some great quality connections, which, 3.5 years later, are still going strong.
Yeah, how we actually know each other is James McGregor, who I had on one of the first casts, actually a really good friend of mine as well, episode 6. He introduced us. I think you met him through school, through the kids.
That's correct. Yeah, our wives met at the park one day, and Tasmania being the wonderful place that it is, when you meet people and I think if you're a decent person and you're a good operator, they want to connect you. James was pretty keen to introduce us to. So it's a testament that we're at least reasonable quality humans.
Yes. And James's company that he founded with his brother and one of his best mates, Biteable.com, Biteable.com, is going great guns. I think they've got over 100 team members now. He was on the cast over nearly 3 years ago now, and I think a lot has changed in that business in yes, I should have you back on.
Yeah.
But tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Yeah, so we're Healthy Business. We've been around for 20 years. A lot's changed in that time, a little bit like that Biteable story. But yeah, we provide workplace health and wellbeing services. So ultimately what that means is we're a professional services firm. We work across blue collar, white collar. And what we're doing for these workplaces is providing proactive and preventative health. So there's benefits. Everybody wins when you get that right. There's benefits for the individual. Everybody's got elements of their health and well-being that they could do with improving. But for the business, which is our customer, there's enormous benefits around productivity, absenteeism, turnover, lag indicators like workers' comp insurance claim premiums and all those types of things. So that's what we're all about. If you really boil it down, driving health outcomes in workplaces is about behaviour change.
Yep, which is very hard. Breaking habits, building new ones takes a long time. 66 days I read a couple of years ago. It's not the 21 days it was touted in the 1950s studies, but a lot of hard work to get those new habits into the workplace.
Yeah, there's value in awareness and getting the message out and education, but driving behaviour change takes a lot longer, and it's a much bigger and more individualised process.
And how did you start out?
Mate, Healthy Business started organically. So I've been in the role of CEO at Healthy Business now for close to 2 years. As I said, at the front end, we're a 20-year-old business. The business started really quite organically 20 years ago. There was 1 or 2 customers that had a bit of a need around health and wellbeing. And back in those days, it was about lost time injuries and soft tissue injuries, and getting into the workplace and providing services to address those. And then, 20 years later, we've evolved as the market has evolved. I became involved, in January of 2021.
Yeah. And you are a shareholder as well?
Yeah. So look, maybe a little bit about my background probably is a good place to jump in here, Troy, is that, I originally started out as a sports physio. I worked in the A-League and the NRL for 10 years. And I had a career change moment sort of in about 2015. Working in professional sport was really difficult. As much as I loved it, for 9 months of the year, you really are working 7 days a week. And I'd always had concerns that to be the dad that I wanted to be the partner that I wanted to be to my wife, it was going to be pretty hard to balance. So I sort of made a bit of a change and changed direction. What I realized in that time was thinking about myself. Like I loved having an impact on people and I loved leadership. But as a clinician in a one-on-one setting, you are impactful, but it's not at the same scale when you're changing systems, driving behaviour change, addressing work environments, all those types of things. So I had been working in the health and wellbeing space, and Healthy Business had been heavily impacted by COVID, but was also in need of a reboot in January of 2021. And I was interviewed and went through sort of a board process to be appointed CEO.
And how old were you when you jumped into this business?
Good point. How old was I? I'm nearly 40, so 37, 38.
Yeah, right. And after working for the NRL, which is a big rugby league here in Australia, for some of those clubs, is that when you started your own business?
I did, Troy, yeah. So I, recognising sort of that I'd learnt a lot from professional sport, and I saw the way that professional sport proactively addressed health and well-being and looked at it through sort of like a risk lens, and made the investment at the front end rather than after the fact. I felt that could be something that industry would benefit from with health and well-being. So when I broke away, I just set up my own. I was a contractor, and then I became sort of a proprietary limited and was doing some consulting, particularly with large government agencies. And that's actually what brought me to Tasmania. I had designed and then implemented a proactive and preventative health and wellbeing program for the emergency services down here. That came to an end, and that's where sort of Healthy Business came into the picture.
And you decided not to grow your practice. You decided to get out of that. And a mate of yours was on a similar path, and you kindly got on the podcast for me, episode 74, Jonathan Moody. So when I interviewed him, that's a couple of years ago now, his business got up to 270 team members with 14 practices and 12 franchisees. But he talks about a lot of the shit he went through to get there and almost going bankrupt. But you decided to take a different path. Yeah,
look, health clinics are a challenging business to run, and having done it, I admire what Moods, as we used to call him back in uni, what Moods has been able to achieve and continues to achieve. He's a very impressive operator.
All right, back on to Healthy Business. Do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business?
Yeah, look, probably about 4 to 5 years ago, top line was at its peak, but there was some dysfunction within the business. There was a real disconnect between sales and operations, and in a change in shareholding, there was a founder who exited the business. That person was really critical in driving top line for the business. So with that sort of disconnect between sales and ops, we then weren't retaining business. There was insufficient pipeline to replace what was being churned. And then COVID hit. So it was a combination of factors, but it meant that in January 2021, change was needed, and that's where I was brought in to give your audience a bit of an idea. So look, in January 2021, top line was tracking down by about 50 to 60% of those halcyon days, of those heights. We worked hard last year to really consolidate the business, get back to some stability, and we're now moving into a growth phase. This financial year, we're tracking to get back about 65% of those top line highs. So there's still plenty ahead for us, but we're back into a growth phase, which is nice after the really difficult window for the business.
So when you got into the business, there were two areas you really primarily focused on. One, sales, building the pipeline up or out. And secondly, was that operational efficiencies, both from a process and productivity, but also a cost as well. You had to trim some of the costs in the business.
Yeah, we probably focused more on the latter, Troy, of really sort of consolidating what it is we do, and let's do it really well. I think in the difficult times that the business has been going through, they had been looking for a magic solution and getting distracted, and let's go here, let's do that. No, let's pull away from that. Let's go here. So when I came in, it was like, well, what do we do? And let's focus on doing that really well. And then secondary to that, but crucially, but that's more the phase we're moving into now, is let's get that pipeline really, really healthy again. So don't get me wrong, there was some urgency around bringing in new business, which we did, but we really focused on, hey, who are we? What do we do? And let's do that very, very, very well.
And how many full-time equivalent team members did the business start with 20 years ago, and where are they at now?
Yeah, look, well and truly predates me, but my knowledge is that it really did start with one, and then pretty quickly two people, solving a need for a couple of customers here in Tasmania. But over the 20 years, we've grown to be all throughout Australia. And then a couple of our customers have actually taken us overseas. So we have a pretty significant presence in Papua New Guinea at the moment. And we have a smaller presence in New Zealand, but that was larger at another point, again, due to some customers taking us over there.
And so how many full-time equivalents would you say you've got now?
We've probably got about 30, low 30s FTE now, but the headcount would be up closer to about 40.
Yeah, great. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
Yeah, and thinking about these questions earlier today, Troy, this was one that I probably got stuck on. I don't think for me there was a moment. I certainly have moments that I look back and I'm very proud about what I've achieved, both in previous career and then the career change. But for me, I try and create regular reflection points, and that's both in my week, but really critically 1 or 2 times per year. Like zoom, and I think it's in zooming out in moments like this that I actually get to reflect on my growth and successes and where I've come from. So yeah, that's probably, I think I don't have one moment, but I do try and create moments to stop and have a think about that, and remind myself that, hey, I have grown here. I have succeeded in doing some things.
And what does success look like to you?
Yeah, mate, I want to do work that motivates me, and I want to, but most crucially, it has to allow me to look after my physical, mental, and emotional health, so that outside of work, I'm a good dad, I'm a good husband, and I'm a good mate, good colleague. That's what success looks like, that I can be in a role that excites me and sparks me, motivates me, but it's not going to have a negative flow-on effect to those things outside of work. The other thing too is I touched on before, Troy, like I'm purpose-driven. I think that's how I got into being a clinician, and that's why this work really aligns with me now. So I want to be old and look back on my life and be proud that I've had an impact.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Yeah, this was really valuable here at Healthy Business, and it was clarity. It was about like why our business existed, and who we are and what's the problem that we solve. So for your listeners, why I sort of lean this way for this question is, until you can answer that, don't go any further. It's really critical that you are clear with that message externally to the market, but also internally. Like, people need to know those things if you're going to then deliver on the promises that you're making to the market. For me, early on, changing from being a sports physio to being in a business world, marketing was something that I had no idea about. Like, I thought marketing was just a billboard that you saw on the side of a building. And what I've just spoken about probably resonates with anybody who's read Donald Miller's stuff around like building a story brand. So that really helped me understand that, and then how to shape it into a message, and how to be able to sort of, I guess, keep it simple. That's part of what I like about that as a resource.
Yeah, it's a great book, and the online tool has got Story Brand. We're just going through it at the moment. Wish I had come across it a couple of years ago for the audience. And I think most small business owners don't value marketing enough. And as Drucker said, there's only two things in business that create value, and that's marketing and innovation. Everything else is a cost. And so I encourage the audience, if you're not already swatting up yourself on marketing, that's a good place to start, is the Story Brand book. But yeah, Seth Godin, other resources, definitely get better at marketing. Even if you've got a marketing person in the business or an agency, the owner should be, more aware of marketing and its power.
Yeah, I agree, mate. And as I said before, like if you're a small business with growth aspirations, do not go any further until that is clear.
How was the business funded?
Yeah, our business started out organically, so just growing based on customer needs. But as it got bigger, we needed to source working capital. So originally that was in the form of bank finance. We work with some really big quality customers that are great payers. So banks like those as debtors. So Healthy Business in the earlier days was funded around debtor finance. A number of years ago, we had a significant shareholder buy-in, which is St Luke's Health. They're a not-for-profit health insurer. They bought into us, and due to their size, they can facilitate funding on much more generous and flexible terms. So we've transitioned away from needing the banks, and with our shareholders being able to provide those.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Absolutely. Yeah, as I said, I'm very passionate about this as a line of work, but also the change that's happening in our space. Our health and wellbeing in the workplace historically has been seen as a nice to have. It's now being understood and moving into being a need to have. So I think if I was starting up again today, I would argue that today is a better day to start than what it was.
Yeah, and you spoke at one of our meetups, and I found it really interesting. You said the legislation here in Australia for work health safety is changing to include the non-physical risks in health and wellness and safety in the workplace.
Yeah, that's right. So the part of that change in the market is that there's overwhelming evidence around sort of the ROI and the benefits of making these as investments. But sadly, there's still been a disconnect for customers. They've gone, oh, okay, I can see all this evidence, but it's still a cost. Even though the evidence is overwhelming that, yeah, okay, you're going to spend some money, but then you're actually going to see that returned plus over 3 to 5 years, there's always still been a disconnect. So sadly, what that's meant is that costs have been going through the roof. Systems are just not coping. So what's happening is that they have actually decided to regulate the management of psychosocial hazards in the workplace the same way that a physical hazard is regulated. So the short version of that is everybody understands what that means around physical hazards, and that's really what health has been interpreted about. So if Steve has a fall from heights and he breaks his leg, that's what everybody has considered the health aspect of health and safety. But we know that health is just not physical. There's psychological health to it. And there are, the same way as there are physical hazards, there are psychosocial hazards. And in Australia, that is changing. Each state is now in the process of regulating that.
Yeah, that's huge. So it's mental health would be a big part of that, I'm imagining.
Yes, mental health is almost the mental health is both positive and negative. When we think of mental health in workplace, we talk more about the negative. The opportunity there is you can be in the positive space, and that has all those great flow-on effects, like I was talking about productivity and reducing turnover and those types of things. But we tend to think of negative, poor health as the cost piece.
Well, hopefully this legislation will help weed out and kick out a few more arsehole managers for the businesses, because I've certainly seen quite a few. mistreat their team members and have a toxic culture. It's just terrible.
Yeah, well, look, at a bare minimum, the requirements are going to be that you actually are looking at this with a risk lens like you would any other aspect of your business. So I think that in itself is just a really welcome change.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Yeah, there's been a few, but when we're talking about healthy business and my tenure here, I spoke about last year and the difficulties and the rapid changes we need to make. So like probably lots of people that you've had on the cast, money, making payroll was an enormous stress. I enjoy leadership because it's about people. So when things were getting tough here, I was stressed about the financial situation and its impact on our people. But I'm learning, right? And anybody, I think you hear some people who say they've got it right. I don't know. I like to meet them, but I'm learning to better control my stress. Yep. I'm learning that stress is good. Stress drives me to do things, but it's when it becomes limiting or dysfunctional that it's an issue. And that's how I interpret the issue. And I'm trying to take some of the emotion out of it. But it's a journey, mate. I'd love to say to you that I've got that right. And here's the wonderful tip for your listeners. Yep. But I think it's just understanding that stress is normal. It is good. And it's how I interpret the issue and try and remove some of the emotion.
Yeah, Mark from Manager Tools talks about the two types of stress. Distress, obviously, is the bad stress, and eustress. Yeah. Positive stress, yeah, which gets you getting shit done, and you're feeling good, you're feeling that sense of urgency, but that stress is positive.
Yep.
What area of business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Yeah, in moving into some senior leadership roles, I had to work on fighting the inclination to jump in and help, or sticking my very big nose in because I'm passionate and I have ideas on what we could do. So I guess I've worked hard to understand that my greatest value is to be separate to that. It's to put the right people in the right roles, give them the right processes and tools and environment to be effective. And once that's in place, then, well, my job's to steer us in the right direction and remind everybody along the way the direction that we're going and the progress that we're making, rather than that inclination that happens every single day to jump back in.
Yep. Yeah, it's hard. What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
Mate, the need to stretch capacity. Before being able to justify or afford additional resources. It's so hard. You are asking so much of your team to stretch, but you're just looking at your numbers and you're like, I know that we just need another resource here, but there's a gap. So I find that really difficult because I know that that's a challenge, and I know that that's putting big expectations on people and our resources.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
This probably connects to what we were talking about before about the stress piece. I'm learning that I actually love the challenge. Some days, some weeks, I get worn out. I get a bit sick of it. But when I stop and think about it, that's exactly what I want to be. This is exactly what I want to be doing. And any time that I've been in a role where I've not had challenge, mate, after a couple of weeks, I'm bored and I don't like it. So I've learned from that maybe in a sadistic way, what I love most is the challenge, and I should embrace that and don't get stressed about it. Don't get emotional about it, because I wouldn't want it any other way.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
Mate, to be a good leader, I need to aspire that my team don't need me. And like I said before, I have that inclination to jump in because I'm passionate and I want to help. But I think I actually need to aspire that they don't need me at all. So, yeah, that pull is real. But I think if I ensure that my intent is clear and our mission is clear, and then invite them to make decisions aligned with that, that's that's the most important mindset shift for me.
Yeah, I think it's natural for us business owners to be a bit of control freaks and perfectionists and micromanage. I remember one guest I had on last year, I can't remember who it was, he identified this pretty early. I think his business has been going 12 years when I interviewed him, but I think it was in the first week or so, he realized how bad he was at this and said to his team, I'm going to work from home. This is well before COVID. I'm going to get the fuck out of your way because I can't help myself. So I'm going to be at home. If you need me, just call me or email me. Yeah.
Yeah, I separate my week, mate. I get out of the office a couple of days a week and work from home, which is where I am today on our interview. And that helps me with part of that, but it also creates or reduces distractions and gives me a window to do the creative type work. I enjoy conversations, and when I'm in the workplace, I end up getting pulled into them and diving into help when I probably, if I'm not there and in front of the person, they probably haven't asked me the question.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Yeah, mate, this is one I'm really strong on. Look, remind yourself, cue yourself, schedule time, whatever it is, but ensure that you're not getting carried away by what presents itself. So to your listeners, what are you going to do to ensure that you're working on the high value, the big rocks in the business, and not just managing by your inbox or what pops up in a day? So the habit of doing that, remind yourself. For me, I create windows at the front end of my week and the back end of my week. They're scheduled time to do those types of things. So at the front end, it's about planning the week, and at the back end, it's about reflecting on the week.
Jump over to growasmallbusiness.com and leave your details to get a short 2-minute email I send on Fridays to help small business owners like you become better leaders. I include some reading or professional development resources I've discovered in the last week. Can you talk to how you've added some people to the team? Some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah, Troy, I'm not gonna pull your leg and say it's all been beer and Skittles, but like I've had a pretty good run in this space. For me, a natural strength of mine is human interactions, and being a clinician, you really got to understand a person really quite quickly to be effective for them. So for me, in hiring people and bringing them into the team, I focus more on the person being the right fit for our culture, and particularly their attitude ahead of skill set or experience. Now, I'm not saying that skill set or experience is not important, but I just try and go about it in that way. And as I said, I'm not saying it's perfect, but that's worked really well for me.
Yeah, I think two things I look for in recruitment, as I've mentioned before, is attitude and aptitude, because you can teach them the skills and give them the experience if they've got the right attitude and they're smart.
I don't know the quote off the top of my head, but Herb Kelleher has a great quote around that. Like you can teach skill, experience comes, but you can't teach attitude.
Yeah. What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Mate, look, I think this could be a whole podcast series, right? Culture gets talked about a lot, but particularly with the type of work we do and the background that we've got as health practitioners, we understand that culture is this complex web, due to humans and their purpose in working. But for us and for me, and I guess tips for your listeners is that clarity piece that I spoke about, in the marketing. I think it's being clear about what we are doing, where we are going, what each of our roles are. And then once you've got that clarity around the purpose and the bigger picture stuff, I really try and encourage my leaders in the business to then be clear along the way. So some praise in the moment, highlighting concerns in the moment. That would be one of my prime tips for driving, as you say, a kick-ass and sustainable culture.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Not always well, Troy, not always well, which being a listener of your podcast, I think is something that comes through pretty commonly. But in taking on this role, I saw it as a legitimate danger because I'd been through poor balance before. And as I said, when I worked in sport, it was 9 months of the year, 7 days a week. There wasn't much balance, but I didn't have family then. I didn't have commitments, and I probably didn't understand myself as well. So I really sort of did not have a good balance. So for me, in taking on this role, saw it as a proper danger. So I talked about it before, but I bookend my week with a Monday morning. Let's look at how last week was and how I scored myself. What am I going to do differently this week? What are the big rocks that I'm going to address this week? How am I going to do that? Have I given myself adequate time in my diary to address those big things? And then at the end of the week, this is probably the more important piece. I score myself. I hold myself accountable on doing those things. But some of the key bits about the balance is I score myself on my mood and my emotions during the week. And I, as well as score it, I will force myself to reflect on why and write it down so that I can go back and look at it at other times. The other thing I hold myself accountable to is hours beyond what I planned and had set in my schedule. So I'm not saying that I'm regimented. If I've booked myself through to 5:30, that at 5:30, bang, it's off and I'm out. There is overflow, but at the end of the week, I hold myself accountable to that. And could I have done it better? And were there negative flow-on effects to my family by that overflow occurring?
That's great. I've never heard of anyone doing that, but a good balanced scorecard to hold yourself to account, and that time of reflection, both at the start and end of the week, is terrific.
Yeah, it's really helped me, and I've refined it over the last 2 years because, as I said, I did have genuine concerns in taking on this role and what was needed for the business at the time, that I'd go back to my old bad habits.
How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
As I've shared with you and the listeners, I've sort of had almost 2 careers, both of which has needed a lot of professional development. So early on in my career as a sports physio, particularly working in elite sport, I used to have to do a lot. It was enormous because your job is to be really at the pointy end of what's occurring. So it's always been part of my working life. When I finished being a physio, I enjoyed being able to maybe direct it a bit more myself, knowing that I wanted to move into business. It was like reading lots of books and having lots of conversations and podcasts and those types of things. A couple of years ago, I decided to formalize it a bit more. I did a grad cert in business. I finished that last year. To be honest, I didn't really enjoy that method of learning. I think because it had been so long since I've been at uni and I'd been more on a create your own journey piece. And then I went back into that regimented type system. I didn't really enjoy that. So I'm sort of still finding my way a little bit now. But to share with your listeners, and I guess how much time I currently invest, I presently place 1 to 2 blocks per week in my schedule that are directed at professional development, but also room for higher level thinking. So it's not necessarily like, okay, I'm going to do 90 minutes and I'm going to read from page this to page this of the book, but it's give myself 1 to 2 blocks per week that I do my absolute best to preserve, that gives me time to do the professional development piece, but higher level thinking that I can remove distractions.
Have you had mentors or coaches along the way?
Not officially labelled as such, Troy, but I've been fortunate enough to meet some really impressive people along the way. And I'm not shy about asking questions or even looking silly at times. Like, I find by letting my guard down and being truthful in saying to someone that I meet who I'm instantly impressed, or I think, oh, I could learn a lot from this person, that I don't know about that, and can you tell me about it, rather than faking it and trying to sort of pretend to be their peer. Like, be vulnerable, be open in that respect. And people like it, and people are really welcoming and very generous of their time and expertise. So I find by being real, people give you their time and continue to do so. And some of those relationships continue for me today. So I don't necessarily have formal mentors, and certainly not paid, but I've got people that I will regularly create time to catch up with and who I can bounce ideas around with.
Do you have a board of directors or advisors?
We do. So our board really sort of escalated in its professionalism and governance piece with the investment of St Luke's Health into us, being a large health insurer and in a highly regulated space such as private health insurance. Governance is a very big strength of theirs. So they provide, they are one shareholder, but they provide 2 board members to our board. And then we have our other shareholders as board members.
So how big's the board? How often do you meet? And you've got a chairperson?
We have a chair. Our chair comes via St Luke's based on that experience. It's a 4-person board and we meet monthly.
Yeah, great. And so no independence on the board?
No, it's something as we grow, we've named up that we would explore and we would look at, but where the business and the sizes at the moment, it's not something we're doing.
All right, mate, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Switching off.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Troy Truen recommended this one to me, Managing the Professional Services Firm by David Maister. It's really been valuable for me in this healthy business role because, as I said at the front end, ultimately we are a professional services firm. It's an old book, but it's got a huge amount of wisdom within it. More recently, to give some ideas to your listeners, I read a book by Jonathan Raymond called Good Authority, and I would recommend that book. And earlier I mentioned Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller.
What's Good Authority about? I haven't adding that to my list.
Mate, Good Authority is, so obviously the name becomes a bit deceiving. So it's about you're an authority, right? You're a leader. You need to be an authority, but it's not that at all. It's a little bit like I was talking about that feedback in the moment and being able to take people on a growth and leadership on a growth journey, but recognizing that as leaders, we are the authority and sometimes we need to play that role, but how you manage, how you balance those 2 things. Jonathan's probably not going to allow me to do his blurb based on that synopsis, but I still would recommend it to your listeners.
Any great podcasts, online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, well, I've mentioned a couple of times now, Donald Miller. He does one called Business Made Simple. I like that because it's keep it simple, stupid. So it's a really good reminder often for me too. I don't listen to it weekly, but I will go back and visit it. And it does sort of bring me back and maybe pull my head out of being a bit too complex and remind me of the fundamentals. And it's an oldie but a goodie, but coaching for leaders with Dave Stachowiak. I do find him a really in-depth interviewer who does get some gold out of his guests.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
One tool. Can I say Troy Truen?
You're calling me a tool.
Well, you read between the lines there. No, look, I have found your podcast to be beneficial. The network that I've been able to create here in Hobart off Grow a Small Business has been beneficial. The other tool that I'd sort of revisit that I spoke about earlier is that create a system or adopt one, whatever, but that you use weekly or daily to ensure that you keep moving the dial on what's high value and not just what presents itself in front of you during the day or what pops up in your inbox. Yeah, create a system or adopt a tool, go and get it.
Finally, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day 1 of starting out?
Relax a bit, Steve. I tend to get engrossed in what I do. I'm motivated by that. I'm passionate, and sometimes that means I get a bit too into it. I would remind myself on day 1, and I continue to remind myself today to relax a bit.
Well, thanks very much for your time today, mate. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure the audience get a lot of value out of it. And congratulations to the founder and the founders, yourself and the team over the last 20 years, getting up to around 30 FTE now and helping businesses around Australia and overseas.
Thank you, Troy. It's been great to be on the podcast.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.